This diary was found in the Museum of Oppression History, next to an empty exhibit. The observation glass was covered in fingerprints all from the inside. Further analysis revealed that the prints aged progressively toward the center of the glass, as if the same hand had been trying to escape for decades, or centuries. The reflection in the mirror is wrong. It's not my imagination. My skin is growing paler, almost translucent. I can see my veins pulsating beneath it, like a bluish map of something I can't comprehend. The fluorescent lights of the Museum of Oppression History buzz overhead, a constant reminder that I am the last living specimen in the exhibit Homo Privilegiatus menos 2050. I try to touch my face, but my fingers meet resistance a few inches from my skin. It's as if there's an invisible barrier, a microscopic force field preventing me from making real contact with my own body. The buzzing of the lights grows louder, and through the mirrored glass of my habitat, I see today's visitors beginning to gather. Their faces are all the same, not in appearance, but in expression. That same vacant look, that same calculated head tilt, like birds observing prey. They never blink. Ever. I've timed it. On the glass, there are fingerprints on the inside, not mine. They can't be mine. They've been here since I woke up in this place, however long ago that was. The days blur together. The digital calendar on the wall always displays the same date, June 15th, 2050. Yet, I've seen the sun rise and set hundreds of times. The smudges on the glass form a pattern. I realized it for the first time today. They're not random marks, they're a message. I need more time to decipher it. But the visitors, they seem to know. Their eyes lock onto the exact spots where the smudges form words, and their lips move in unison, whispering something I cannot hear. The speaker crackles. Welcome to the exhibit of the last specimen of Homo Privilegiatus. Please maintain a safe distance from the glass. The subject still exhibits behavioral toxicity traits from the 21st century, but it's not me they should fear. I'm not the real danger here. If only they knew. My name is Michael Sullivan, or at least it was. Now I'm just specimen 47. I don't know exactly how I ended up here. My memories are fragmented, like a puzzle where half the pieces have been deliberately removed. The museum is a labyrinth of sterile hallways and exhibition rooms, each dedicated to documenting various forms of historical oppression. I am kept in a special wing, in an environment that replicates a typical apartment of a cis-white straight man from the 21st century, a cruel parody of what they called privilege. The visitors observe me from behind special glass, watching as if I were an endangered animal. In a way, I am. The museum guides, all dressed in immaculate white uniforms, describe my species with a mix of scientific fascination and poorly concealed contempt. My habitat is a meticulous recreation of what they call toxic masculine space, circa 2024. A flat-screen TV continuously plays old programming, sports, action movies, video games they consider problematic. The walls are adorned with posters of rock bands and movies, now classified as patriarchal supremacy propaganda. There's a bookshelf with carefully selected books to showcase privileged literature, mostly classics written by dead white men, as emphasized in the explanatory plaques. The kitchen is stocked with food. They label the oppressor's typical diet: red meat, frozen fast food, beer. Each item has a small plaque explaining its role in perpetuating systems of domination through conscious and unconscious dietary choices. Even my wardrobe has been curated as an anthropological exhibit, with tags detailing how each article of clothing reinforced stereotypes of gender and power. The bathroom features a full-length mirror with sensors that measure my posture and facial expressions, searching for signs of what they call toxic alpha behavior. Every time I exhibit any trait deemed overly masculine, a soft alarm sounds, and red lights flash, alerting visitors to a live example of problematic behavior. The worst part is the cameras. They're everywhere, some obvious, others nearly invisible. Their mechanical eyes follow me constantly, recording my every move for what they call a longitudinal behavioral study of the specimen. Visitors can press buttons that change the lighting in my environment, theoretically to observe reactions to different stimuli. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night to flashing lights, as if someone is playing with the controls. On the outer wall of my habitat, there's a detailed timeline explaining the evolution and eventual extinction of the privileged white man. The dates stretch to 2050, but something's wrong. Events I remember clearly are described completely differently, as if history itself is being rewritten before my eyes. The patterns began to emerge gradually, like a photograph developing in a dark room. First, I noticed that the visitors never blinked. Their eyes, fixed and glassy, followed me with disturbing mechanical precision. Their expressions were perfectly identical, that same look of studied interest, as if programmed to exhibit the exact amount of scientific disdain. During the day, I heard the guides repeating their memorized scripts. Observe how the specimen demonstrates typical behaviors of his eronote, how he holds objects, as if everything in his environment is naturally his by right. The visitors nodded in unison, their necks moving at the same precise angle. At night, when the main lights went out, and only the bluish glow of emergency lights remained, the whispers began. Voices in a language I had never studied, but instinctively understood. They spoke of maintaining system balance and feeding the fundamental narrative. Certain phrases repeated like a mantra: the contrast must be preserved, and without shadows, there is no light. In my nocturnal investigations, I discovered a pattern in the objects of my habitat. Each item seemed carefully chosen to tell a specific story. The books on the shelf had subtle markings, small symbols engraved on their spines that formed sequences that made no sense, till I realized they were coordinates. I mapped them out on paper, and they formed a complex diagram of the museum, revealing rooms not shown on the official blueprints. That's when I found the diaries of the previous specimens. They became my obsession. Each volume told a similar story: initial confusion, followed by disturbing discoveries, and finally the same cryptic phrase about understanding the purpose. But there was more between the lines. Using a reading technique I learned from one of the specimen's notes, I found hidden messages. They spoke of a transformation beyond the physical, a forced transcendence, and something called the Mirror Project. Dr. Jung became my only connection to anything remotely human in that place. Her visits, ostensibly routine to bring meals, were calculated for specific moments when the security cameras coincidentally failed for exactly 2 minutes and 47 seconds. She never spoke directly about what was happening, but she left clues. A newspaper with certain words circled, a badge positioned so I could see access codes reflected in the glass. One day, I found an old tablet hidden inside a false wall in my habitat. On it, security footage showed the visitors after leaving my exhibit. They gathered in circular rooms, forming perfect geometric patterns, and seemed to feed on something invisible in the air. Their bodies trembled in unison, and for a moment, their forms distorted, revealing something inhuman beneath the surface. The museum staff began showing increased interest in collecting samples from me: blood, tissue, even the air I exhaled. I overheard conversations about purity levels and behavioral catalysts. My skin wasn't the only thing changing. I started to notice that I could feel the visitors' emotions, like colors in the air, and all of them carried the same sickly hue of programmed satisfaction. In my final nocturnal explorations, before using Dr. Zheng's access card, I uncovered records of previous experiments. Photographs showed other last specimens, not just white men, but representatives of every group society had decided to move beyond. Each had served their purpose and disappeared, fueling some kind of collective social transformation I still didn't fully understand. The truth began to form in my mind like a terrible, inevitable pattern. This museum wasn't just a memorial or a warning, it was a factory. A site of transformation where the past was actively cultivated and harvested to sustain something far more sinister in the present. With the access card trembling in my hands, I waited until the last staff member left. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights gave way to a sepulchral silence, broken only by the soft hum of ventilation systems. Each step I took down the empty corridors echoed like a gunshot. The museum's underground was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and numbered doors. The air was heavier down there, laden with a chemical smell that reminded me of hospitals. The walls, unlike the pristine white of the upper floors, were bare concrete, marked with symbols and codes I didn't recognize. The first room I entered resembled a records archive, shelves upon shelves of folders, all organized chronologically. One folder, from 2045, read, Collective Narrative Sustainability Project, Phase 1, Specimen Selection. Inside were photos of men who looked like me, all labeled as Homo Privilegiatus, but something was off. In the most recent photos, the subjects looked manufactured. Small imperfections revealed they weren't fully human. In the next room, I found cryogenic chambers. 12 of them, all empty, but still operational. Each bore a plaque, reservoir of collective memory. Monitors displayed graphs of social outrage levels and community cohesion through shared antagonism. A pattern emerged. Whenever outrage levels dropped, a new specimen was activated. My heart nearly stopped when I found the operating room. It was a circular amphitheater, with torturous-looking medical equipment hanging from the ceiling. At its center was a metal chair with restraints. The walls were lined with screens displaying what appeared to be enhancement surgeries. I saw people being transformed, their faces and bodies altered until they became those expressionless creatures who observed me daily. In one corner, an old projector played a film on loop. The date in the corner read 2047. It showed what appeared to be a social recalibration session. Dozens of people connected to machines, their expressions shifting in unison as images of historical oppression flashed on the screens. It was mass brainwashing, but with a specific purpose: to create a society united by shared hatred for a common enemy. On a nearby table, I found an unlocked tablet. The open file was chilling. Specimen Maintenance Manual, Guidelines for Narrative Preservation. The document clinically detailed how I was to be kept in a state of perpetual performative privilege, to serve as a psychological anchor for post-human social cohesion. But the final paragraph made me vomit. The specimen must not be informed it is a construct. Its implanted memories and belief in its own humanity are essential to maintaining the authenticity of the exhibit. The gradual transparency of the skin is a necessary side effect of the sustainment process. Once the specimen becomes completely transparent, it will be ready for the final phase. My hands trembled so violently, I dropped the tablet. The sound of shattering glass echoed down the corridors. In the shard's reflection, I saw my face hand for the first time. Noticed the small imperfections, the nearly imperceptible signs of fabrication. How many versions of me had already been here? How many last cis straight white men had been cultivated and discarded to sustain this charade? The sound of footsteps in the hallway froze me in place. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Dr. Zhang. Her eyes were now completely black, with no irises or pupils. How had I never noticed before? "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice now a metallic echo that seemed to emanate from all directions. "You're not ready to understand your true purpose." When I tried to run, Dr. Zhang caught up to me in the main corridor. She stared at me intently. "Do you understand now?" she asked, her voice reverberating unnaturally. "We need you. Without the oppressor, there is no reason for our unity. Without the monster, there is no need for heroes." She stepped closer, her movements deliberate, her shoes clicking against the floor I could have sworn was carpet before. "Every society," she continued, "needs its boogeyman. The Nazis had their Jews, the communists had their capitalists, the religious had their heretics. We have you." My skin was now so translucent that I could see the fluorescent lights shining through my fingers, casting distorted shadows on the walls. This wasn't a symptom of confinement, was an intentional transformation. I wasn't being preserved. I was being cultivated, like a virus in a lab, kept alive just enough to serve my purpose. But why? I managed to ask, my voice trembling. Perfect harmony is unstable, she replied, now circling me. We tried to create a society without prejudice, without division, without hate. Do you know what we discovered? People began creating new divisions. It's human nature. So, instead of fighting it, we channeled it. A single receptacle for all the hatred, all the scorn, all the guilt. The visitors began appearing in the corridors, dozens, then hundreds of them. Their identical faces, their vacant expressions. I realized that each new generation of visitors fed off my toxicity to justify their own existence. I was their collective scapegoat, their perpetual outlet. The most ironic thing, Dr. Zhang continued, is that you don't even have to do anything. Your mere existence, the memory of what you represent, is enough to keep our society united. A common enemy is the strongest glue there is. I tried to run, but my limbs were growing increasingly transparent, almost ethereal. The visitors began a low chant, a frequency that made my bones vibrate. I felt my consciousness fragmenting, memories dissolving like sugar in hot water, until I was pulled back. Now, as I write this account with hands I can barely see, I understand the terrible truth. I'm not the last white man. I'm the last remnant of individuality in a world that chose absolute uniformity. Soon, I will be nothing more than a concept, a symbol of what this new society decided to leave behind. But one question haunts me, more terrifying than my own dissolution. When I disappear completely, who will they turn against? Who will be the next receptacle for their carefully cultivated hatred? Perhaps that's why Dr. Zhang sometimes looks at me with that flicker of doubt. She knows she might be disposable too. The museum lights flicker, and through my nearly invisible skin, I can see the circuits that now replace my veins. I don't know if I'm the last real person, or just another of their elaborate constructs. Perhaps the truth is even more horrifying. Maybe I'm both.